Hello, everybody. Welcome to SOUNDWAVE, and this is where we are changing and transforming the world, our workplaces, our communities, one voice at a time. Welcome to Own Your Conversation. This is a series created for every one of you out there who wants to learn everything about what SOUNDWAVE is, the strategies, the tips, and the tricks, and how to skillfully use our voices and target our talk and engage people around us. And as we say here at SOUNDWAVE, amazing things happen between people when the quality of the conversation is good. And when that happens, we can shift the dialogue, change the conversation, and shape the outcomes and the culture that we want. Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Pong, and I am the global partner of SOUNDWAVE. And together with me, hosting this program today is none other than the SOUNDWAVE creator himself, Mr. SOUNDWAVE, Kevin Eyre. Good morning to you, Kevin. How are you doing?
Yes, Kim Pong, good morning to you. I'm good this morning. Still cold, still January here in the Northern Hemisphere, but it's okay. And as usual, I'm looking forward to today. I think we've had some really nice conversations in this series so far, and I'm really excited to be talking about Voice to Advocate because I know it's close to who you are, and I have lots of things to say about this and lots of questions to ask. So I'm looking forward to today very much.
Yeah, and it's been a really pleasant surprise at all the fantastic positive feedback that we've been getting from coaches around the world and from people who have done the SOUNDWAVE assessment. The things that we are doing here at SOUNDWAVE is really contributing to the communities out there in how people could actually be more aware of how they talk and how they can target their talk and create those outcomes and impact that they've intended here. So I'm really stoked. And this today, it is part of our 10-part series where we are focusing on the 9 verbal strategies of SOUNDWAVE, and as we call them, the 9 voices in your SOUNDWAVE. And today we are focusing on the suggest cluster, and the voice that we're talking about today is the voice of advocate. Now, before we get on to the real conversation with Kevin, go ahead, and subscribe to the channel. Click on the bell if you want to be notified every time we post a new episode. Now, once again, and as usual, I'm going to start off, Kevin, with a quote, and you have not heard me say this before, so this is going to come to you, big surprise, but hey, if I know you, you will roll with it. You'll come up with something really brilliant here, right? So the quote here, is from Malala. Everybody knows who Malala is, right? And she is quoted saying this: "When the world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." So, Kevin, when I first heard this quote, it spoke to me about courage. It spoke to me about authorities. So my question to you, my dear friend, is this: is this the voice of advocate?
Well, it could be. It could be. My hesitation is that the voice to advocate is a powerful, impactful, arguably a loud voice. But if it's the only voice in the room and it brings a sort of compelling argument that advocacy tends to do, then maybe it is the voice. Maybe it is the voice. There's a reverse way of looking at this, which is that maybe too much advocacy silences the contribution of others. It's a really interesting voices. But Kim Pong, you probably knew I was going to do this because I know that you're somebody who has the voice to advocate pretty high up in their ranking of voices in their own sound waves. So, and there'll be a lot of people listening in here who know you and be thinking, aha, yes, this is almost certainly Kim Pong. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you use the voice to advocate and why it's so important to you?
Well, I mean, thank you for turning the table on me because it's supposed to be, about the genius, across the other part of the world is talking about the voice here, right? But, so
I'll have something to say. Don't worry.
Yeah, the voice of advocate. I think for me, Kevin, I can't say that it is my favorite voice, but I would say that it is my most unconscious voice. In that, it's always up front and center, even without me knowing it. And to some extent, I think sometimes it's fabulous because people find me inspiring, energetic, somebody that catches their attention when I'm talking, right? But on sometimes, it's totally exasperating because I'm like a broken record, like an LP that's just it's stuck on a groove and it just kept going and going and going and going again, right? So that's pretty frustrating for me actually. But yeah, so I mean, I think the advocate voice for me it is probably the most unconscious and probably the most influential voice for me, but at the same time could be the voice that unbuckles everything that I'm most passionate about. So that's been my top of the world view on what the advocate voice is for me.
So the real advantage of the voice for you, and actually I can extrapolate and say for anybody who uses this voice skillfully, is that it can be inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
So usually if somebody is skillful at the voice to advocate, they are articulate in the sense that we usually think of that word.
Mm-hmm.
They put together their arguments and their ideas with a high degree of fluency. They're deeply persuasive. I mean, the voice is really trying to win people over. Whereas when we talked about articulate last time, we talked about its neutrality.
Yeah.
When we're talking about advocate, we're talking about its partiality. It is in favor of something or it's against something. It takes a stand. It has a position. It knows what it thinks. It knows what it wants.
Mm.
And the phrase I like to use is that it musters arguments. It brings together pieces of information, facts, emotional manipulation, whatever is needed, and it bundles it all and throws it out towards people so that what they get is the full force, the full impact of the persuasive power of somebody's talk. And it can be amazing. Now, the thing is, as you've already intimated, Kim Pong, if you're talking to the converted, then you're likely to infuse them even more. It's like a big political rally. People turn up. We love the leader talks. We love the leader even more. Okay. However, for those people who don't agree with your position, it's a polarizing voice. It will pull people in and it might push people away.
That's me too.
Now, and so you do that. Do you pull people in and you push people away? I didn't.
Oh.
I've just been pulled in, Kim Pong. Tell me about the people you push away.
Shall we not go there? But no, since you asked, right? I mean, now that's a great question, right, Kevin? And the thing here is this, right? If I were to use it, unskillfully, or I'm accentuating it, like I mentioned to you, I come across to people like a broken record, right? Stuck in a groove, couldn't get out of that it kept going back again and again and again, and people finds me extremely irritating, right? They go like, could you just shut up and sit down and give somebody a chance to talk, right? Or it could be like, you've gone over this point so many times, Kim Pong, and what else is there, right? How else can we do this, right? I come across almost as a preacher without words, right? I'm just standing there and just gesticulating. Is that a word? Yeah, gesticulating and just doing all that, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that's a part where I begin to push people away. And I think the other part about that for me would be, in the instance where people are not responding to my advocacy, I think sometimes I get really impatient. I get really mad. I get really confused. And the words that comes up from my mouth sometimes are like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? What is it that I'm not doing? Or what is it that I'm doing that's causing so much confusion in the audience right now?
And thank you for sharing that and being so open about it. And it's great that you can see the limitations. So because you're telling me that, I imagine that in many situations you've sort of got that under control. You've worked out that there's a point where continuing with the advocacy becomes counterproductive.
Yeah.
And so you'll switch to a different verbal strategy, or you might just press the pause button. You might just remain silent for a while and allow other people to contribute. There's some really interesting things about this voice that I've noticed in the work that we've done in SOUNDWAVE. For people who have a really high preference for advocacy, and you know those SOUNDWAVE profiles where the top voice is off the scale and all the others are much further back. There's daylight between the first and second voice. Well, if you imagine that to advocate is that top voice,
Yeah.
then there are a couple of things that I've noticed about people with that profile. The first one is there's a bit of a tendency when they're in that zone not to listen. Okay, they are on transmit, and what matters is the transmission. Okay, a very little story, short story. I coached somebody once who was whose bosses felt that he didn't listen to people and he talked over people. And so I sat down with him for some coaching sessions, and we agreed what we were going to work on. And I started to talk, and we'll call him Fred. And I'd only been speaking for about 3 or 4 seconds, and Fred interrupted me. So I moved beyond the interruption, and I carried on, and I talked for a few seconds more. And then he interrupted me again.
Wow.
So I let it go, and I carried on. Third occasion, I stopped him, and I said, Fred, let's just stop a minute, because so far I've been talking for probably less than 2 minutes, and you've interrupted me on 3 occasions. And yet we're here to work on your development because your bosses think you don't listen to people. What do you make? And he said, well, the reason I interrupted you is I knew what you were going to say. And so what you have there is compounded, an example of somebody who just needs to put their view across almost to the point where it doesn't matter what somebody else is saying. Now, this is a really extreme example. Okay, it's a really extreme example, one in thousands that we might come across. But I've always remembered that conversation because the extremity of it highlights the overuse nature of the voice. So it stayed with me. And I think it's a more extreme version of your own account of what happened to you and all other people with strong advocacy. There's one other thing which I've recently been reading about. There are a couple of studies about the effect of people's persuasive power. And there's an interesting thing that happens, which is that if you have 2 groups of people with opposing views who are well informed, they're even less likely to agree with each other's views.
Wow.
If you have people who are less informed and they're trying to persuade each other, there's a better chance that they might persuade each other. But building argumentation to support your point of view makes you more entrenched.
Wow.
It makes you less open to the prospect of other people. And yet people never stop advocating. People continue to believe that if I keep making the case, if I keep campaigning, eventually I'll persuade. But actually, when we stand back from that and ask ourselves the question, how many people have we really managed to convert to our cause? The answer very often is very few. But we've got more persuasive in the process then. That's important.
Yeah. And that is fascinating, right? I mean, when people knows what they're talking about, they tend to listen less, if I hear it correctly. But if they do not know what's going on, they tend to listen more. I find that incredibly fascinating. But seriously, as you were talking about the research behind SOUNDWAVE that shows that people who knows what they know, they tend to listen less. Now that is suspiciously like me, because because when I'm like I'll quote that famous Stephen Covey that says, people do not listen to understand, they listen to reply. And I think for me, as I'm listening to people's conversation, I tend to kind of like jump forward in the conversation. I tend to not listen, but I'm like setting up my case here to advocate my cause, or to advocate the next steps or the next direction here. So yeah, guilty as charged here, Kevin.
But I think we have all. So it's easy to identify some of the reservations we might have about any of the voices. But what we've also got to understand is their positive effect.
Yeah.
Now, you and other people with a strong preference for this voice, for example, can be very inspirational, very persuasive. There's, the gesticulation is an expression of the energy that comes with his voice. Energy is very captivating. We can get swept along by it. But there's another quality and dimension which will exist for those people with his preference.
Mm-hmm.
Seen it also, Kim Pong, which is that because you tend to be so persuasive, the effect on somebody on the receiving end of that is that they have to be on their mettle. They have to be well rehearsed, well prepared, or able in the moment to think very fast to contest the position or the argument that's coming in their direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually, in some ways, to be on the receiving end of it is quite developmental. Can I hold my ground? I know what's going to come at me. I know it's going to be very persuasive. So I have to think hard here about how I assert a position or defend a position which is clear and is not simply railroaded with the persuasiveness. Now, I can always tell in our conversations when I've made a point that you've heard in spite of your advocacy, because you go silent for longer than is normally the case.
My gosh, am I that transparent? Oh my dear.
We're all that transparent, really, Kim Pong, yes. No, but it's interesting, there's full force and energy and very, very expressive, almost rhythmical explanation or argument about something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably you're quite, as a lot of people are with this voice, quite used to winning through that process, being persuasive. Now, when that argumentation is stopped, you're less accustomed to that. Mm-hmm. And so it literally stops you in your tracks. Yeah. And you then have to, whoa, hang on a moment. I wasn't expecting that strong a counter argument. Yeah. Maybe I just again. Okay.
And Kevin, that is so true, because there are a couple of times where it's really silly now that I think about it, right? Like, I'm in the midst of advocating certain things or using my advocate voice at its strongest, and I thought, my gosh, I got a really, really good way of wrapping the whole story up and advocating it in with that passion, with that authority, with that clarity, right? And when I finished, there was dead silence. There was no nodding of heads, there was no applause, there was no nothing. And I'll tell you, it is so uncomfortable. I do not know what to do with that silence, right? And I think that's about learning about, okay, how do I use the advocate voice in combination with some other voices that will allow people at that moment to reflect, to think, and to respond, right? So I want to ask you the next question here, because I'm looking at time here and I want to make sure that we cover all the different things about the voice of advocate here. If someone like me, right, with the advocate voice, or someone that's not like me that chooses to use the advocate voice, and we are skillful about in using that particular voice, what is the effect it would have on people, when we are skillfully using the advocate voice?
Well, I think the word which is very important, so I'm happy to repeat it really, is that it will inspire people, or maybe to put it slightly differently, it will motivate people.
Yeah.
You will move people.
Yeah. People
will feel moved to act.
Yes.
In some way or another. That's its real power and impact. We talk in Soundwave about creating a movement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we need advocacy to create a movement. We need people who believe in the power and the value in order to persuade. This is a really compelling part of the way in which we talk to people and persuade people and influence people. So that's its most positive effect. It moves people, it motivates people into action. Mm-hmm. And the secret here is not to overuse it. Mm-hmm. Because the voice to advocate carries with it energy. The energy takes on a life of its own. This is why people go on a bit with it, because actually it's quite enjoyable to feel so hyped for a period, to feel the energy flowing through you and literally coming out of your mouth. Now, you don't really want to stop that feeling if you don't have to.
Yeah.
You'll keep going until essentially the volcano has erupted and it's now relaxed. Whoosh, it's out. Now we relax, because people can't keep that performance up forever. The energy will drain at a certain point. So if you're a tactic for dealing with people who have higher levels of advocacy with whom you don't agree is just let them talk themselves out.
You're evil. You're evil.
Yes, that is the Dr. Evil. I've got an English accent, so I can always play evil people in American Hollywood movies. They always
I love it. It is so true, right? Because if you don't stop me and I keep advocating, at some point in time, I feel like a total klutz, right? It's go like, gosh, why am I talking here? Right? By the way, there's an acronym that is WAIT, wait, right? So it's taught to me by a good friend of mine, and it says wait, and the acronym stands for why am I talking, right? So that's a great, great reminder for me, when I am actually, over advocating here. I want to reverse the situation here right now, Kevin. So what happens to people, right? When I either unconsciously do not use the voice, or that voice is passive in my vocabulary here, right? What are we missing? What does the absence of that voice has on people around us?
So there is a very marked impact. I mean, we characterize the absence of the voice as somebody being perceived as potentially assertive. Okay, and there clearly is a connection between being an advocate and being assertive. I mean, you have to have a point of view. You have to be willing to get in amongst it and to say your piece or fight your corner. Now, people who use the voice to advocate have impact. They are notable and they are noticeable. So they tend to stand out. They get attention. This was going back to our favorite friend Sengi. This was his point.
That's right.
Managers advocate too much and inquire too little. Of course, if you're in a important social position, what do? You put yourself forward, you step forward, and you assert. Okay, you assert your point of view. Now, the consequence for people who have a low preference here is precisely the opposite of what we've been describing. They don't stand out. They are heard, possibly unseen. They don't make an impact. Now, they could make an impression through all sorts of other things that they do. Okay, but in the moment when somebody needs to stand up and say, I believe we're heading north, this is the way to go, and they don't do it, then there's a significant absence of momentum or drive or direction. So though in the worst cases, those people can be overlooked. I worked with somebody recently, a very, very capable young woman who scored, I think it was about 1 point on the voice to advocate. Now, I know in your world, Kim Pong, that is a totally unimaginable possibility. But there are people who score next to zero. And this person was precisely that. Very happy to sit back, quiet, saying nothing, listening. And she was regarded for the work that she did. But interestingly, the expression that people used about her was, I don't think she has real leadership capability. Because leaders, amongst other things, are people who will assert. Leaders are people who will advocate, who will take a position. And so there's also a very conventional view maybe about what leadership is. But it's very difficult to have a leader who says nothing and who doesn't take a stand and take a position.
That's interesting.
And so these are the effects, the more negative effects on somebody who doesn't use that voice.
So I think we may have just opened up the Pandora's box here, Kevin, because I think people out there who are leaders and they go like, look, I score really low in advocate voice. What is SOUNDWAVE talking about, right? So I guess the question is this, right? must leaders, I know we're moving a little bit out of context here, but I think it's important to address this. Must leaders have the voice of advocate?
They need to use it when they need to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of preferences in a Soundwave profile, it could be somebody's ninth preferred voice.
Yeah.
Okay, bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know that. It's helpful to know that. But work with an individual who was a leader and had that profile would have to be as simple as, right, let's think about the situations where it is important that you take a lead, where you state your point of view and your position clearly. Let's look at those situations. Let's consider how you perform in those situations, and let's work on practicing the use of this voice, because you sort of have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have your team wandering around saying, I don't really know what he or she believes in. I don't know whether they will take a stand or not. Because part of that taking of a stand is often to take a stand in the interests of the people who work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they don't hear that, they think, well, is he with us? Is he leading us? Is she leading us? Is she moving us in the right direction?
Yeah.
It raises questions that you really don't want to be raised. And I do hasten to add, Kim Pong, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, this is not the only dimension or any quality of leadership. And it is perfectly possible to be a reflective, quiet, introverted leader and do an amazing job. But the skill those people will have is knowing when, in spite of those overriding characteristics,
Mm-hmm.
they need to move forward and they need to assert. And that becomes a developmental task.
Yeah. And I think this is really, really cool in what we're talking about, and it's about, I don't think we are not stereotyping leaders with the voices that they should have, right? That's not what we're talking about, but rather I think we are saying, look, I think we should, like you said, we should be able to use the voice when we need to, right? I think that's the constant refrain in Soundwave that we have, which is, how do we shift that dialogue? How do we change the conversation to shape the culture and the outcomes that we want? And I think the idea is that, we are not, while we may be fixated in the way we use our voices, the way we talk is not fixed. And as you often mention, it is extremely fluid. We can actually learn how to advocate better, even if our advocate voice is 0, on a whole scale of 9 here. Now, watching time here, I want to move into more of the visual part of the conversation here, right? Now, the voice of articulate is often, being termed as the voice of passion in Soundwave here. So, what are some, personas that you can think of that describe this voice of passion, which is advocate, that people could, relate to?
So my favorite one is the campaigner. So the environmental campaigner, the religious campaigner, the political campaigner. So they are strongly associated with a cause, and they will argue, persuade, promote, engage people in the issue that is close to their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another feature here. Would you remember we talked about the voice to diagnose? And I think you said, Kim Pong, that this was the voice that was closest to the inner dialogue. And I think I responded by saying it has a more cognitive function.
Yeah.
I by contrast, the voice to advocate is much more in the gut and in the heart. It's about what we believe, what's important to us. For whatever reason, there'll be a multitude of reasons. So this is the inner person speaking about the things that are terribly important to them in their view. And so, we have to afford that respect and give it time and attention and be courteous and listen.
Yeah.
Actually, whether we agree or we don't agree, because there's something to understand and to learn.
Beautiful. So if I can just summarize that, right, then if the voice of diagnosis is about the head, then the voice of advocate is really about the head and the heart at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would put balance in the heart. I think
Yeah.
it's all out here. Even though you might, I mean, another persona, for example, would be a lawyer in a
Mm,
court of law. Why somebody should or shouldn't be incarcerated.
hmm.
Okay, now that's a slightly different type of advocacy because it depends much more on fact. But nonetheless, even what you'd see, and you see it on TV dramas in particular,
Yeah, yeah.
is the full force of the passion
Mm,
coming through. It's never just about the points of law.
mm,
There's always something about
mm.
the human dimension to it, the detail, the intimacy of conversation.
Yeah,
And then have to pull all of our voices together
yeah,
to make that happen.
yeah.
Not just the extreme advocacy that becomes preaching.
Got it. So let's move from persona to metaphors right now, right? So again, looking at time here, give us two metaphors that best, aligns itself and describes, what the voice of advocate is all about.
So I think it's a little extreme, but a megaphone would be a good metaphor.
Actually, I
I'm
was hoping that you say megaphone because this is what I want to show everybody. So this is what it is, right? A megaphone, and these are the cards that we use in SoundWave, to help our coaches coach and all that. So coaches, if you do not have these cards here, please place an order for this, right? So this is my sales pitch here, Kevin. I got to do this, right? Advocate, megaphone, go for it, Kevin. Yeah.
that was perfectly embodied, encapsulated in all those. Um, the other thing that came to mind, and what maybe I could call this a minor tropical storm. So it's not a storm causing huge damage, but there's something about, there's heat, there's energy.
Yeah.
It's an unavoidable set of environmental factors coming towards me,
Yeah.
and there isn't really a way out. I have to get to the other side of it, or I have to get to the eye of the storm before I actually get some space to be able to do something else. So let me refer to it as a mild tropical storm. Might mean the full force of the voice to advocate.
I love that. Actually, as you're talking about, that minor storm, and I think the previous episode, I think we're talking about, the articulate voice, which is about the I in the storm, right? It's that calm, it's that slowing down of time, right? But the advocate voice is that whirling, right? It's like it's moving, it's the energy. And there's a lot of, the whole idea of advocate voice, being disruptive. And it can be positively disruptive in whatever we're doing. But then I think if you over accentuate it, it can kind of destroy a number of things that that we are talking about or we're trying to do together here. So I love that. Yeah, go for it, Kevin.
So, and often we can think about this in terms of somebody advocates and then somebody else articulates in the eye. But what happens when the same individual advocates, creates the storm, and then waits for the eye of the storm and shifts to articulate?
I love it.
And then we get a huge dramatic shift in the energy that people are experiencing.
Oh.
And this becomes a very, very compelling way of talking to people. So this is partly what we mean by skillful dialogue. We don't just stay hooked inside a particular voice. We say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to stop before the record gets stuck. And I'm just going to slow everything down for a minute. I'm going to check in with people. Okay, now that movement of energy will have a profound effect on people who are experiencing you, and it's not that difficult to do. It sounds like it's difficult, but a little bit of awareness, a little bit of practice, and talk is fluid. Language is fluid. We can do that.
I love that because that's almost poetic, right? You stir up your energy, and then you wait, right? You articulate, and then you respond. I'm watching time. We got to end.
No.
So I'm gonna ask you, that final genius question, right? As the creator of Soundwave and in doing all this tons of research over the years, on how people talk around the world, what is your best advice for people who wants to perfect the voice of the advocate? What do they need to do?
So I think there are two angles to come from. If they're not doing enough of it, first of all, if they think there's a requirement to advocate more, I would say the bathroom mirror.
Huh.
Practice in front of the bathroom mirror. Stand in front of the bathroom mirror and practice rehearsing your speeches and your arguments.
I gotta
And
stop you there.
see.
I gotta stop you there. That's exactly what I do all the time.
There we are.
Oh my god.
There we...
I'm sorry.
So, well, it clearly works, Kim Pong. That's the other
Thank
thing.
you. Yeah, you did.
But I think it's a case of practicing. Everybody's capable of investing energy into the way they talk, and so you need to practice. If you're reasonably unassertive, then just coming out into the world and suddenly being very assertive is never going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You take space to do it. So think about an upcoming presentation and rehearse it in front of the mirror and see what you make of it.
I love that.
And then maybe go and get a little bit of feedback from somebody. I think if we're coming from the other end, because there is, the polarity really works here, the underuse, the overuse. If we're too preachy and we are aware that we're too preachy, then I think there's a need to develop a little bit of inner discipline,
Mm-hmm.
which is the question in my mind is, have I made this point already?
Mm.
Okay. Now, I am actually a great believer in repetition, and repetition is part of the micro skill set of advocate. Okay, let's do over this again. Once you've done it twice, it's probably enough. 3 times you might get away with, but if the voice in your head is saying you have outlined this argument at least twice and possibly 3 times already,
Mm-hmm.
then stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So there's a sort of inner discipline if you're doing too much of it, and there's a get up there in front of the bathroom mirror and practice if you're not doing enough of it, and get comfortable with yourself.
Love it. Thank you very much. And I really, as you talk about the last part where it's about the repetition, I think for the voice of advocate, very often for me, it's about learning the discipline of knowing when to stop, right? That's really the key thing here. So I would love to talk more about this voice of advocate because there's so much to talk about it. But time is up and we got to say goodbye. So, I'm just going to say, thank you once again to Kevin. And for those of you want to know more about this, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell to send a notification your way every time we post a new episode here. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time here. And Kevin, once again, thank you for clocking in and have a great day. I will see you next week, same time, same channel. And we're going to be talking about the voice of advice, right? Which again, it is within the suggest cluster. So with that, see you, Kevin. Have a great day and bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.